In the circle of gods, there is a famous laughingstock of the three realms, according to legends. 800 years ago, there was an ancient nation in the Central Plains, called Xianle Nation. Its people were well off. The nation was large, and had a substantial amount of resources. It had 4 treasures, countless beauties, massive gold coffers, art masterpieces, and a crown prince. This crown prince, well, how do you say it, is a unique person. The emperor and empress both considered him to be their precious pearl, spoiling him, and often praising him. My son will definitely be a ruler of the people, and be known by everyone. However, the prince completely had no interest towards power or wealth. His interest, using his own words to explain in one sentence, is I want to save the world. When the prince was young, he was devoted to cultivating. During his cultivation, there were 2 small, well-known stories. The first story occurred when he was 17 years old. That year, the Xianle nation performed a large ceremony dedicating the gods. Although this sort of practice already became abandoned for several hundreds of years, you can still look it up in ancient texts and hear it from older generations. Think about how important and influential this ceremony is. Shangwan Festival. Shenwu Street. There is a sea of people on both sides of the street. The royals and the upper class are sitting in high buildings, chatting away. The royal guards are opening their way through the streets with their chinking armor. The girls are starting to dance. Snow-white hands sprinkle down a rain of flowers, leaving one wondering which of the two, the woman or the flower, was more beautiful. The golden carriages leave behind sounds of laughter that resonate through the royal capital's sky. In the last of the line of royal guards, 16 gold-bridled horses pull a pedestal. On top of this high pedestal is the focus of everyone's attention, the ritual master. During the ceremony, the ritual master will wear a golden mask and ceremonial robes. He will hold a treasure sword in order to act as the one who subdues demons and destroys monsters. The number 1 martial god in 1,000 years, martial emperor, Jun Wu. Once one is chosen as the ritual master, they will receive the highest glory. So the selection for the position is extremely strict. The one that has been chosen this year is the Crown Prince. The entire nation is sure that he will definitely complete an incredible ritual dance. However, on that day, an accident occurred. When the guards lapped around the city for the 3rd time, they passed 100 feet or so high city wall. At that time, the martial god on the pedestal was about to pierce the demon through with the sword. This is the most sensational and heart-racing moment of the entire ceremony. The people on both sides of the street started boiling with excitement. The people on top of the city walls were also stimulated, as people scrambled to see, pushing and pulling each other. This time, a child fell from the city wall. The people started screaming, and just when they thought the child would fall to the ground, the crown prince slightly raised his head, jumped, and caught the child. The people only had time to see a bird-like shadow fly into the sky, before the prince already safely reached the ground with the child. The golden mask fell to the ground, revealing the young handsome face behind it. In the next moment, the entire crowd started cheering. The people are happy. But all the royal state preceptors witnessing this moment started having headaches. Never would they think there would be such a huge mistake. Inauspicious. Too inauspicious. Every time the pedestal circled, the city was meant to pray for 1 year of peace. And now that it has been cut off, wouldn't that bring the nation annihilation? The royal state preceptors worried to the point where their hair fell like rain. They invited the crown prince and politely asked, "Your Highness, can you lock yourself in your room for a month? You don't need to really do that, just pretend to." The crown prince slightly smiled and said, "No." He said it like this: "Saving people is not a bad thing to do. Why would the heavens punish me for something I did right? Oh, what if the heavens really did punish you? Then the heavens are wrong. Why would the ones who are right apologize towards the ones who are wrong?" The state preceptors had no words to reply. This crown prince is just this type of person. He never encountered something he could not do, and never encountered anyone who did not love him. He is the right path, the center of the universe, and so, the hearts of the state preceptors were all very bitter. You don't understand, shift. But, it's not easy to say too much, plus they did not dare to say too much. The crown prince would not listen anyway. The second story also happened when the prince was 17 years old. According to the legends, south of the Yellow River, there was a bridge called One Thought Bridge. On that bridge was a ghost that wandered there for many years. This ghost was very horrifying, wearing broken armor, and its feet stepped on fire in the night. Its entire body was covered with blood and pierced with swords and arrows. Every step left behind blood and the burnt markings of the fire. Every few years, he would suddenly appear in the night and wander towards the ends of the bridge, blocking travelers. He would ask 3 questions. What is this place? Who am I? What should you do? If you answered wrong, you would be swallowed by the ghost. However, no one knew the correct answers, and so the ghost swallowed several people throughout the years. The crown prince heard about this when he was traveling, found the bridge, and waited on the bridge every night. Finally, during one night, he met the ghost. The ghost appeared, and true to its legends, was very sinister and horrifying. He opened his mouth and asked his first question. The prince responded, "This place is the mortal world." The ghost replied, "This place is the void. Good luck after opening the door. Just only the first question." And he is already wrong. The crown prince thought, "I would answer all 3 questions wrongly anyway. Why wait till you finish?" And so, he revealed his weapon and started fighting. This battle was epic. The crown prince is highly skilled and the ghost became even more frightening. One man, one ghost, fought on the bridge to the point that it seemed like day and night would flip. In the end, the ghost was finally defeated. After the ghost was defeated, the prince planted a flower tree on the bridge end. At this time, a Taoist passed by just in time to see the prince sprinkle a layer of soil to see him off. The Taoist asked, "What are you doing?" The prince said 8 strange words: body in the void, heart in the orchard. The Taoist listened, and slightly smiled. He transformed into God wearing white armor, stepped on a cloud, brought about some wind, and flew into the sky. Only then did the prince know that he coincidentally just met the martial emperor that came down to subdue demons and destroy monsters. The gods started noticing the prince when he performed as a very outstanding ritual master on the day of the ceremony. This time, after the situation with the One Thought Bridge, one god asked Jun Wu, "What do you think of this crown prince?" He also replied with 8 words, "The future of this child cannot be measured." On the very night, the sky above the palace had many heavenly signs and there was large thunderstorm. During the thunder and lightning, the crown prince soared into the heavens. Once someone soared, the heavens would tremble a little. When this crown prince soared, the entire heavens shook 3 times. To cultivate into the right path is too hard. Too hard, requires talent, requires cultivation, requires luck. The birth of God is often accompanied by a slow cultivation path of hundreds of years. But it doesn't mean that there aren't extremely talented young cultivators who soar, or people who bitterly train for their entire lives and still fail. Even if they do wait until a heavenly tribulation occurs, if they do not pass, they will still die, and if not dead, at least crippled. Like the sands nearby the river, they become among the many, forever remaining as a mediocre person who cannot find their paths. And this crown prince, without a doubt, is heaven's spoiled child. There is nothing he cannot obtain. There is nothing he cannot do. He wanted to soar to the heavens, and truly, when he was 17 years old, he did, since he was already the people's center of attention, and plus the emperor and empress missed their child. They ordered for many temples built in his honor, and sculptures made in his visage for people to pray. The more believers there were, the more temples there were. The longer their lives were, the more power the prince received. And so, in just a few years, the prince's glory and fame reached a pinnacle, until 3 years later, the Xianle nation fell into chaos. The reason for this is due to the ruler's tyranny, and the traitor army started rising. However, even if war started to arise, the gods could not interfere. Unless it's due to the interference of demons or monsters, whatever is supposed to happen will still happen. Just think, the mortal world is filled with wars and conflicts, and each side will have their reasons and believe they are right. One day you back up your country. Tomorrow, another god helps their country take revenge. Wouldn't that result in a war of gods, causing this conflict to never end? As for the Crown Prince's situation, it's even more important for him to avoid interfering. But he doesn't care about these rules. He spoke to Junwu, "I want to save the world." The martial emperor has power accumulated from thousands of years, but would still not dare to speak these words. It is easy to think how he felt when he heard the prince say these words. He could only helplessly say, "You cannot save everyone." The prince said, "I can." So, without worrying about repercussions, he went down into the mortal world. The people of the Xianle nation naturally celebrated his arrival. However, it has always been passed down the saying that gods unauthorized to go down to the mortal world will definitely not have good endings. In the meanwhile, the flames of war had not lessened, but became even larger. It's not said that the Crown Prince did not work hard, but it would be better if he did not even try. The harder he worked, the more confusion there was. The Xianle people were badly beaten and suffered heavy casualties. In the end, a plague swept through the nation's capital and the rebels entered the palace. The war ended. If the Xianle nation could be said to be panting out of breath before he came, then this Crown Prince directly suffocated this nation after he did. After the fall of their nation, the people realized something. In the long run, their Crown Prince was not as great as they thought he was. To say it more unpleasantly, isn't he an incompetent waste? Lost in their pain of losing their family and their nation, covered with wounds, the people vengefully stormed into the Crown Prince's temples, knocked over his sculptures, and burnt his temples to the ground. 8,000 temples burned for 7 days, and 7 nights until nothing was left. From that day on, a martial god who protected peace disappeared, and a pest god who brought about disasters and calamity was born. When people say you are a god, then you're a god. When people say you are shit, then you're shit. You are whatever they say you are. It has always been so. No matter what, the prince could not accept this reality. The thing he could not accept even more was his punishment. Banishment, dissolve. His powers banish him into the mortal realm. From when he was born, he was repeatedly spoiled. He had never suffered pain. Yet this punishment let him directly fall from the clouds into the mud. And in this mud, he experienced for the first time how it felt to go hungry, to live in poverty, and to be dirty. It was also the first time he did things he never thought he would ever do. Stealing, robbing, cursing, and giving up. He lost all his face, every bit of his self-esteem. However ugly you wanted it to be, it was. Even his most loyal attendants could not accept his changes, and chose to leave. Body in the void, heart in the orchard. These 8 words could be found everywhere in Xianle nation. If they weren't pretty much all burned to crisps after the war, the Crown Prince would probably be the first to smash it into pieces. The person who said this phrase had already proven that when he was in void, his heart was not in the orchard. He soared fast, and he plummeted even faster. He held a fleeting glance at the martial god road. The events that occurred on One Thought Bridge felt like yesterday. But the heavens shook a little in guilt, and the things that passed remain in the past, until many years later, on one particular day, a sharp clap sounded through the heavens. and this crown prince rose to the heavens for the second time. Traditionally, any banished gods would abandon any hope of climbing up, or if not, go down into the ghost realm. They pretty much have no chance of flipping their situations ever again. The second time he soared was truly deserved, gloriously loud and eye-catching, but the loudest and eye-catching part of it was that, after he soared, he stormed into the heavens and started fighting like a crazy maniac. And so, just after 15 minutes, he was kicked down from the heavens once more. 15 minutes. It can be said to be history's most hectic and shortest-lived soaring period of all time. If you can say that the first time was a beautiful speech, then the second time is a farce. After these 2 times, the gods are all irked by this crown prince, and in their annoyance also contained a bit of cautiousness. After all, the crown prince already fought like crazy after the first time he got banished. For the second time, wouldn't he want to murder everyone? Unexpectedly, after being banished? For the second time, he did not become a demon. He lived peacefully and obediently. There were no problems at all. The only problem wasn't he too earnest? Sometimes, he would sell his skills. He could sing and play all sorts of instruments. He would even smash a huge rock against his chest. As one of his performances, they already heard that the prince was talented and skillful. But they discovering it through this type of situation really makes them feel complicated. At times he would even diligently collect scraps from the street. The gods were all shocked. It is incredible how things turned out. Now, if you say to someone that your son is the Xianle crown prince, it is even more vicious and effective than cursing them to forever have no heirs. Even so, as a once noble and precious crown prince and a god, the fact that he stumbled to this point is impressive. As for the laughing stock of the 3 realms, this is how he came to be. After laughing, those with more sympathy maybe would sigh. That once glorified son of heaven is really gone. His sculptures toppled down. His nation is overthrown. Not even one believer is left. He has been forgotten by the people. And so no one knew where he had gone. Being banished once is already incredibly disgraceful. Being banished twice, no one can climb back up to their feet again. Many years passed until one day, a sound resounded through the heavens. The earth and the heavens shook. The lanterns shook too, its fire shaking within its confines. The gods were awakened from their palaces, walking fast and asking at the same time, "Who soared this time? This is such a large rattle. Who knows?" In their first few steps, they were all sighing, "Impressive, impressive," but in their last few steps, they were all hacked by the truth. "Are you finished or not?" That famous weirdo, that laughingstock of the 3 realms, that legendary crown prince, he soared to the heavens again. "Congratulations, your highness." Hearing this, Xie Lian looked up, smiled and said, "Thank you, but can I ask you what you are congratulating me for?" Lin Wen put his hands behind his back, saying, "Congratulations on becoming number 1 in the most anticipated god to be banished poll. Xie Lian, still at least it's first place. But I think that since you are congratulating me, there should be something good about it." Lin Wen, "Yes, you can obtain 100 merits by becoming first place." Xie Lian immediately replied, "Next time, if there is a poll like this again, you definitely need to include me." Lin Wen asked, "Do you know whose second place is?" Xie Lian thought about it for a while and said, "That's too hard to guess. After all, I have the ability to take all of the first 3 places." Lin Wen, "You pretty much got it right. There is no second place. Your talent in this field surpasses any other god by miles. No one can catch up to you, Xie Lian. You flatter me. May I ask who the previous winner was?" Lin Wen, "There is no previous first place either. This poll was created this year, or, to be more accurate, this day." Xie Lian was slightly startled and asked, "This poll wasn't created just for me, right?" Lin Wen, "You can believe that this date was a coincidence. and that you won first place by coincidence. Xianle smiled. Okay, I'll be happier if I think like that. Lin Wen continued. Do you know why you won first place? Xie Lian, because everyone thinks I deserve it. Lin Wen, let me tell you the reason. Please look at that clock. Lin Wen pointed to it, and Xie Lian turned his head towards a beautiful view. He saw a white jade palace and a pavilion surrounded by clouds and flying birds swirling in the sky. He looked at the view for a while, and asked, Did you point in the wrong direction? Where is the clock, Lin Wen? I didn't point wrong. That's the place, did you see? Xie Lian earnestly looked there again, and said, I can't see a clock. Lin Wen, that's right then. There was originally a clock there, but when you rose to the heavens, it jolted and fell. That clock is even older than you are, but it has lively personality. Whenever someone soared, it would come down and join in. During your ascension, the clock gong rattled like crazy. It couldn't even stop. In the end, the clock shook down from the clock tower, and finally stopped. When it dropped, it even fell on a god, Xie Lian. Then, is it better now? Lin Wen. No, it's still being repaired. Xie Lian. No, I'm talking about the god. Lin Wen. He's a martial god. At that time, he immediately cut it into 2 pieces. Again, look at that golden palace over there. Did you see? He pointed again, and Xie Lian looked again. He saw a beautiful, golden roof shrouded among the clouds, and said, Ah, I see it this time. Lin Wen. That's wrong then. There was originally nothing there. When you ascended, many of the pillars of their golden palaces tumbled down. Their glazed tiles broke, and their reparations would take a while. So in the meanwhile, they could only build some new makeshift ones. I'm responsible for this. You're responsible for this. Oh, Xie Lian wanted to make sure, and asked, Did I offend a lot of gods just after soaring? Lin Wen. If you compensate, then maybe not. Xie Lian. Then how can I compensate? Lin Wen. Easy. 8,880,000 merits. Xie Lian smiled. Again. Lin Wen. Of course I know that you can't even obtain 1/10 of that number. Xie Lian sincerely said, How do I say this? Although it's embarrassing, I can't even take out 10,000th of that number. The prayers of the mortal believers would transform into a god's powers, and every believer's prayer incense would count as 1 merit. Xie Lian finished smiling, and seriously asked, Do you want to kick me down the heavens, and give me 8,880,000 merits? Lin, when I'm a literary god. If you want someone to kick you, you should find a martial god, so they can kick you harder, and give you more merits. Xie Lian sighed. Let me think a bit more about what I should do. Lin Wen patted his shoulder. Don't worry, when a cart meets a mountain, there will always be a road through. Xie Lian, my situation is, the boat meets the bridge end, and naturally sinks. If it was 800 years ago during Xianle Nation's most prosperous period, 8,880,000 merits are not hard to earn at all. The Crown Prince would give them, without even blinking his eyes. But now is different from before. His temples were all burned down without a trace. There are no believers, no incense, and no offerings. Needless to say, there is nothing left anyway. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. With a headache, he squatted on the side of the road for ages before he abruptly remembered that he hasn't visited transmission array after he soared yet, and he forgot to ask what the password was. The gods set up a transmission array together, so they can use their divine sense to communicate. But you need a password in order to locate the correct array. The last time Xie Lian entered the array was 800 years ago, so there was no way that he could still remember what the password was. He used his divine sense to scout around, and found an array that seemed familiar. He carelessly entered the array and was blown in the face by loud cries of a large crowd. Careful! You can't change your bets. This time, let's bet how long our Crown Prince can last. I bet a year. A year is too long. Last time was 15 minutes, so let's bet 3 days. This time I bet 3 days. 3 days. Don't do that, you fool. 3 days has almost passed already. Xie Lian silently came. Back out. Wrong. It's definitely not this one. The upper heavens constitute all the vital gods that are all well known. Because they all used their own abilities to soar, these gods typically hold a dignified aura, and are well restrained in order to uphold their images. Their speech and actions all have a pretentious feeling to them. There's only Xie Lian, who soared, for his first time, that would use the transmission array to greet every single god, and thoroughly introduce himself from head to toe. After he backed out, he searched through the arrays once more, and randomly went into another array. After he entered the array, his heart relaxed, and he thought, it's so silent. This one should be it. At this time, he heard a voice that lightly asked, Your Highness, you have returned again. You would feel very comfortable after hearing this sound. The voice is gentle and respectful. However, if you carefully listen, you would realize that the voice is very cold and emotionally cold as well, letting people think that this voice does not have good intentions. Originally, Xie Lian wanted to properly enter the array and lurk there for a while, but since someone started speaking to him, he can't just pretend to be deaf and mute. Besides, he is very happy that the upper heavens still have someone willing to speak to this pest god. And so, he quickly replied, Ah yes. Hello everyone, I'm back again. How would he know that after this one question and answer, all the gods in the transmission array perked their ears? That god slowly said, Your Highness Ascension this time really created a large commotion in the upper heavens. The nobility walk everywhere, and heroes are as common as flowing rivers. To become a god, one must first become an emblem of the people. It has always been easier for those with great accomplishments or talent to ascend. And so, it's not an exaggeration to say that a king, prince, princess, or general isn't some rare occurrence, who isn't some important or glorious child of the heavens. Everyone is just polite to call each other Your Highness, Your Majesty, or General. The gods would call each other whatever sounds more courteous. But after that, God said those 2 sentences. Your Highness no longer sounded courteous. Although he greeted him Your Highness. One could not feel an ounce of respect in those words. In the opposite, it feels like he is using a needle to stab people. The transmission array has some other people who are also crown princes that felt their hair rise down their back after his greetings. Xie Lian could tell the other does not have good intentions, but he didn't want to argue. So he thought, I'll run. He smiled and said, It's been okay. But that god would not let him run, and lightly said, Your Highness is okay. But my luck has not been so okay. Suddenly, Xie Lian heard a secret message from Ling. When Lin Wen said one word, clock, Xie Lian realized at once. So he was the god who was hit by the clock. Since it's that way, then they aren't mad without a reason. Xie Lian is very accustomed to apologizing, so he immediately said, I heard about the thing with the clock. Many apologies, I'm really sorry about that. The other himped a sound, not letting others know what he meant. There were many martial gods in the heavens, many of whom ascended after he was banished. So Xie Lian could not pinpoint who he was just by hearing his voice. But he couldn't apologize to someone whose name he didn't even know. So he asked, May I ask how I should greet you as? After those words, the other became silent. He was not the only one silent. Everyone in the entire transmission array became silent, deathly silent. Lin, when transmitted, Your Highness, although I don't think you would talk with him for so long. Without realizing, but I want to remind you, that is Xuanzhen, Lin Wen, Xuanzhen. Being shocked, he choked up for a bit, and just reacted. That is Mu Qing. Xuanzhen General is the southwest martial god, having a total of 7,000 temples. His reputation has spread far and wide, and this Xuanzhen General's original name is Mu. Cheng, who was once the lieutenant general under Xianle nation's crown prince. Lin Wen was also very shocked and asked, "You really didn't realize who he was?" Xie Lian, "I really didn't know who he was. Before, he didn't talk to me this way, and plus, I don't even remember when was the last time I talked with him. If it wasn't 500 years ago, then it was 600 years ago. I almost completely forgot how he looked like, so how would I know how he sounded?" The transmission array remained deathly silent. Mu Qing didn't peep a sound, and the other gods pretended that they weren't listening while excitedly waited for someone to continue the conversation. To say these two, it's really awkward. After their situation was spread to others for so many years, everyone already knew what was pretty much going on. That year, when Xie Lian was Xianle nation's crown prince, he cultivated in the imperial dojo, which were on royal grounds. Access to these grounds was extremely limited and strict. Mu Qing, who was a peasant whose father was a criminal and executed, was not qualified at all to enter the imperial dojo, so he could only work as a servant, helping the crown prince clean his room in the dojo or bring tea and water. Xie Lian thought he was hard-working, and so he asked the royal preceptor to break the rules and accept Mu Qing as his disciple. Mu Qing could only enter the imperial dojo and cultivate with him because of the crown prince's will, and once the crown prince ascended, he brought along Mu Qing to the heavens. However, after Xianle nation was destroyed and the crown prince was banished to the mortal realm, Mu Qing did not follow the crown prince. Not only did he not follow the crown prince, but he did not say a word in defense of the prince. The crown prince was gone anyway, and so he was free. He searched for a cave and started cultivating diligently until after a few years, a heavenly tribulation appeared and he ascended too. Before it was one in the heavens and one on earth, and now it's still one in the heavens and one on earth. Except that the situation is completely reversed. Lin Wen, he's really angry. Xie Lian, I think so too. Lin Wen, let me say something to him while you take the opportunity to run. Xie Lian, no need, right? I'll just pretend nothing happened. Lin Wen, no need. I feel awkward just by looking at you too. Xie Lian, it's been okay. For Xie Lian, this person, anything could happen, just not death. He doesn't have a lot of anything, but he would definitely lose a lot of face. He has done things that were more awkward than this by many times over, and he would still think, it's been okay. Who knew that you couldn't count your eggs before they hatch? Just after he said, it's been okay, a voice roared, who the hell destroyed my golden palace? Get out. This one roar made all the gods felt that their scalp was going to explode. Although their stomachs were rolling over, they calmed themselves and silently waited for Xie Lian's response to the angry insults. Who knew that there is no such thing as most exciting, only more exciting? Xie Lian didn't even start replying when Mu Qing made a sound. He laughed to claps. The other coldly said, you're the one. Okay, just wait for it. Mu Qing lightly replied, I never said it was me. Don't make slanderous accusations. The other said, then why did you laugh? Are you sick? Mu Qing, it's not that. I just feel that your words are laughable. The one who destroyed your palace is right in this transmission array. You can ask him yourself. As things evolved to this point, Xie Lian became too embarrassed to think of running. He coughed. It was me. I'm sorry. After he talked, the other became silent as well. By his ear, Lin, when transmitted, Your Highness, that one is Nanyang. Xie Lian, I recognized who he is already, but I don't think recognized me. Lin Wen, no, he just frequently enters the mortal realm, but hardly ever returns to the heavens, and didn't know that you ascended again. Nanyang General is the southeast martial god. His temples come near 8,000 in number, and he is extremely beloved by the people. His original name is Feng Xin, and 800 years ago, He was Xianle Crown Prince's #1 general. Feng Xin is a very loyal person. He was the Crown Prince's guard from the time Xie Lian was 14 years old. They ascended together, were banished together, and were exiled together. But sadly, they could not undergo these 800 years. In the end, they drew their lines, and parted their ways, never to meet each other again. A former superior master was reduced to this laughingstock of 3 realms. Someone who didn't have incense offerings, temples, or believers. The 2 retainers who had once sat underneath him both passed heaven's tribulations, ascending and becoming strong martial gods, who each oversaw a whole region. With circumstances like this, it was impossible for people to not wonder more. If you were to ask Xie Lian to choose someone who made him feel more awkward between Feng Xin and Mu Qing, he would say they're all okay. However, if you asked bystanders whether they wanted to see Xie Lian fight Feng Xin, or if they wanted to see Xie Lian fight Mu Qing, then everyone would make different choices according to their tastes. After all, there were abundant reasons for either pair to fight, so it was hard to pick the more interesting option. Therefore, when there was no reply from Feng Xin's side for a long time, because he had unexpectedly stopped talking and instead immediately hid, everyone felt utterly disappointed. Meanwhile, Xie Lian collected his tail and beat himself down a bit as he said, "I also didn't anticipate making a commotion like this. It wasn't deliberate. I've inconvenienced everyone." Mu Qing responded in a cool manner, "Oh then, that was indeed quite coincidental." Coincidental. Xie Lian also thought it was really too coincidental. How could the clock fall right onto Mu Qing, while his ascension also happened to destroy Feng Xin's palace? For bystanders, it was as if he was deliberately taking revenge. However, it was true that Xie Lian was the type of person where, if there were 1,000 cups of wine with only one poisoned, Xie Lian would always manage to pick the poisoned one. But there was no way to control what other people believed, so Xie Lian could only say, "I will try my best to compensate for everyone's golden palaces and other losses. I also hope you may give me some time." You didn't need a brain to understand that Mu Qing definitely wanted to continue his sarcastic remarks. However, since Mu Qing's golden palace didn't suffer any losses, and even the clock that fell onto him was sliced into 2 halves, continuing to be overbearing would appear unsightly, and something beneath his identity. Therefore, Mu Qing also concealed himself before falling silent. When Xie Lian saw that the terrible messes had left themselves, he also quickly ran. He was still genuinely and seriously pondering over where he was supposed to get those 8,880,000 merits when the next day, Lingwen invited him to go to her Lingwen Palace Hall. Lingwen was the heavenly official in charge of managing heaven's personnel. When mortals wished to get a step ahead in their careers, they would worship her. From the ground to the very top, the whole palace hall was filled to the brim with official documents and scrolls. This kind of scene was utterly shocking, one that would make anyone shiver with fear. Xie Lian saw, as he walked forward, that every heavenly official, coming out of Lingwen's palace hall, dragged out an exceptionally tall stack of paperwork. Their faces were pale, and if they didn't have an expression that looked as if they were about to collapse, then they had a look of numbness. When the 2 of them finally entered the palace hall, Lingwen turned around and got straight to the point. "Your Highness, there is a matter in which the Emperor would like to request your help. Are you willing to assist him and lend a helping hand?" In heaven, there were many people who had the titles Zhenjin or Yuanjin. However, only one person could be called the Emperor. But if that person wanted to do something, then there would never be the need for him to besiege other people. This was why Xie Lian stared blankly for a bit before he replied, "What matter?" Lingwen handed him a scroll before explaining. "Recently, the North has a large number of zealous worshippers repeatedly praying for blessings. It can be assumed that they aren't passing their days peacefully. These so-called zealous worshippers generally refer to 3 types of people: First, rich people. They paid money in order to burn incense and build temples for gods. The second category consisted of those missionaries who would preach to bystanders and, last but not least, the third type of zealous worshipper were the people whose body and mind were thoroughly doused in faith and belief. Among them, most of these worshippers belonged to the first category, since in this world, rich people were like carps passing through rivers. The third category had the least people, because if one was truly able to get to that level of faith, then their degree of proficiency was surely quite high, and they won't be far from ascending themselves. The people Ling Wen mentioned was clearly from the first category. Ling Wen continued speaking. At present, the emperor cannot attend to the north. If you are willing to take his place and make the trip, when the time comes, regardless of how much offerings these zealous worshippers make, everything will be allocated to your altar. What do you think? Xie Lian received the scroll with both hands as he said, "Many thanks." This was evidently Junwu helping him, but instead he flipped it around and made it sound as if he was asking Xie Lian for his help. How could Xie Lian not see through that? However, he couldn't find more fitting words to express what he thought in place of the two words he had just said. Ling Wen replied, "I'm only responsible for handling these affairs. If you want to thank someone, you should wait for the emperor to return before personally thanking him instead." "Oh right, do you need my help borrowing some kind of magical artifact?" Xie Lian answered, "There's no need. Even if you give me a magical artifact, once I go down, I won't have any magical power, and so I won't be able to use it." Xie Lian had been beaten down twice, so he lost his magical power. It was easier to cope in the heavens, the place where all the immortals assembled. After all, spiritual power was abundant and the source won't dry up, thus he could casually grab some to use. However, once he returned to the mortal realm, he would be powerless. If Xie Lian wanted to fight with magic, then he could only make do by finding someone he could borrow spiritual energy from. Something extremely inconvenient. Ling Wen pondered for a moment before saying, "Then it would be best to borrow a few martial gods to assist you and lend a helping hand." The current martial gods either didn't recognize him, or they didn't like him. Xie Lian understood that aspect thoroughly, and so he responded, "There's also no need for that. You won't be able to borrow anyone." However, Ling Wen seemed to have taken it into serious consideration and only said, "I'll give it a try." There wouldn't be a difference whether she tried or not. Therefore Xie Lian didn't approve or oppose her words, and allowed Ling Wen to try. As a result, Ling Wen entered the spirit communication array, before announcing in a bright tone, "Everyone, the emperor has an important task to be handled in the north, and urgently need people, which martial god highness can lend out to martial officials from their palace halls to help." The moment her voice faded, Mu King's floaty voice emerged. "I've heard that the emperor isn't in the north right now, so I'm afraid you're borrowing people for his highness, the crown prince, right?" Xie Lian mentally thought, "Are you keeping guard at the spirit communication array all day long?" Ling Wen was on the same wavelength as him. Although she only wanted to slap the Mu Cheng who was hindering her work right out of the array, she started speaking with a smile. "Juan Zhen, why am I always seeing you in the array these 2 days? It seems like you've been stealing time to slack off, and now you're quite idle." "Congratulations, congratulations," Mu Cheng replied in a light tone. "My hand is injured, so I'm recuperating." Every heavenly official there mentally thought, in the past, it would be nothing difficult for that hand of yours to split a mountain in half. So, what would hacking a foolish clock into pieces do to you? Originally, Ling Wen had wanted to deceive 2 people to come work before explaining the details. But not only did Mu Cheng guess those details in one try, he even said them out loud. With the circumstances now, it was certain she wouldn't be able to find anyone. Sure enough, no one else answered her inquiry for quite a while. Xie Lian also didn't believe anyone would come forward, and thus told her, "You see, I said you wouldn't be able to borrow anyone." Ling Wen responded, "If Xuanzan didn't say anything, I would have indeed been able to." Xie Lian smiled. "Those words of yours had been as if you were carrying a pipa, but concealing half its face, beautifully blurring the scene to some degree. People would have thought they were going to help the emperor with some work, so of course they would come. But when they come and realize they were going to have to work with me, I'm afraid there would be trouble. How could we work together like that? In any case, I'm used to being alone, and I'm not missing an arm or a leg, so let's just go with this. Thank you for your trouble. I'll leave now." Ling Wen was also powerless. Thus, she cupped her hands in a salute, before saying, "All right. I wish your highness' journey goes smoothly, and may the blessings of heaven's officials be upon you." Xie Lian replied, "All taboos are off." Waving his hand, he left in a confident and free manner. 3 days later, Mortal Realm, the north by the side of a major road, there was a small tea house. The storefront wasn't big, and the shopkeepers were simple folks, but it was expensive because the scenery was good. There were mountains and bodies of water, there were people and a city. They had everything, not much of everything, not much, but just right. Located in the middle of such scenery, if you were to come across the tea house by chance, it would certainly become a wonderful memory. The tea house's tea sommelier was exceedingly idle, since he currently didn't have any customers. Thus, he moved a small stool to the door of the store and began looking at the mountain and the water, the people and the city. He was happily looking when, from afar, he saw a Taoist clad in white walking over. Taoist was covered in dust, looking as if he had been walking for a very long time. When he came closer, he walked past the small tea house before suddenly stopping in his tracks and slowly retracing his steps. The Taoist tilted up his bamboo hat with his hand before raising his head. He only took one glance at the store before he started speaking with a smile. "Chance encounter, little store, the name is interesting." Although this person had a tired appearance, he also had a face full of smiles. It made the people looking at him unable to stop the corners of their own mouths from bending up. The Taoist then asked, "Excuse me, may I ask if Mount Jun is nearby?" The tea sommelier pointed in a direction for him before replying, "It is in this region." That person breathed out, and for once he didn't spit out his soul with that breath. In his mind he thought, "I've finally arrived." This person was precisely Xie Lian. He left the Immortal City that day. Originally he had already decided the location he would descend to. Xie Lian had wanted to fall near Mount Jun. Who would have thought that when he left without a care, and jumped down without a care, his sleeve would get caught on a carefree cloud? Yes, it got caught on a cloud. Even Xie Lian didn't know how his sleeve got caught on a cloud. In any case, he tumbled around at a lofty high altitude, and by the time he rolled down he had no idea where he was. After 3 days on foot, he finally reached his originally planned arrival location. Thus, for a short while, he felt extremely moved. Entering the tea house, Xie Lian picked a table beside the window before asking for some tea and snacks. He finally got seated after his previous difficulties, when he suddenly heard endless wailing and the sound of beating drums from outside the room. Xie Lian turned his gaze toward the street before seeing a group of people from all ages escorting a crimson-red marriage sedan as they walked past the TEAHOUSE. This procession was surrounded by an extremely odd air. At first glance, they seemed to be the relatives delivering the bride. But if one looked closely, they would realize that on the faces of these people, there were solemn expressions of grief, anger, dread, yet the only emotion that wasn't present was joy. Whatever the case, it didn't have the appearance of a wedding. Yet contrary to that thought, everyone was wearing red flowers as they played wind instruments and beat their drums. This situation was really too weird. That tea sommelier carried a copper teapot in his hand and raised it up high to pour some tea. He had also seen this scene, but he only shook his head before leaving. Xie Lian followed that strange, departing procession with his eyes before pondering for a brief moment. He was just about to take out the scrolling when had given him to look over it one more time, when he suddenly felt something dazzling flit by. The moment Xie Lian raised his head, a silver butterfly flew past his eyes. That silver butterfly was sparkly and translucent, looking pure and limpid. As it flew around in the air, it left behind bright traces. Xie Lian couldn't help but reach out a hand toward it. This butterfly was extremely intelligent. Not only was it not frightened, it even temporarily stopped on his fingertips, both wings glittering and beautiful to the utmost degree. Under the sunshine, it looked as if it was a fragment of an illusion. After a moment, however, it flew away. Xie Lian waved at it, something that could be considered as his goodbye. But when he turned back, his table had 2 more people sitting there. This table had 4 sides. One person sat on the left, and another sat on the right, each taking one side. Both people were teenage boys who looked around 18 or 19 years old. The one on the left was taller, with facial expressions that looked quite defined and brightly handsome. Within his gaze was an arrogant and obstinate light. The right side had very light skin. He looked delicate and pretty, yet also refined. However, his expression looked somewhat overly cold and apathetic, an appearance that made it seem as if he wasn't too happy. In fact, the color of the faces of both people didn't look that great. Xie Lian blinked his eyes before asking, "You two are?" The person on the left replied, "Nan Feng." The person on the right responded, "Fu Yao." Xie Lian mentally thought, "It's not like I'm asking for your names." At that moment, Ling Wen suddenly transmitted her voice over. She said, "Your Highness, there are 2 small martial gods from Middle Heaven who are willing to help. They've already gone down to look for you, so they should have arrived by now." The so-called Middle Heaven was naturally relative to Upper Heaven. The heavenly officials of heaven could be simply and roughly divided into 2 categories, the ones that ascended, and the ones that didn't. The heavenly officials of Upper Heaven had all ascended by relying on themselves. There were only about 100 within the whole of heaven, and they were each extremely precious. But within Middle Heaven, the deities there were the ones who were brought up by appointing them as deputy. Strictly speaking, their full names ought to be called fellow heavenly officials. However, when people called them, more often than not they would leave out that fellow word. Since there was an upper heaven and a middle heaven, was there a lower heaven? There was in single quotes. Actually, when Xie Lian had ascended for the first time, there really had been one. At that time, heaven was still divided as upper heaven and lower heaven. But later, everyone found a problem when they introduced themselves and opened their mouths to say, "I am from lower heaven so and so." It sounded truly unpleasant. With the lower word existing, it made them feel especially inferior. It must be borne in mind that among the deities of Middle Heaven, there was definitely no shortage of talented people. Their magical power was rich and strong, and they were each excellent and well-known figures. The only difference between them and real heavenly officials was merely how they lacked experiencing a heavenly tribulation. But who knew, maybe one day that heavenly tribulation they were waiting for would really come. Therefore, some people proposed to change a single word, turning introductions into "I am from Middle Heavens, so and so." This was much more pleasurable to hear, although they both had the same meaning. In short, after the change, Xie Lian hadn't gotten used to it even after quite a while. Xie Lian looked at these 2 small martial gods, with one face only uglier than the other. It looked completely unlike they were willing to come forward and help. Thus, he couldn't help but ask, "Ling Wen, I think they don't look like they came down to help me, and instead it looks more like they want to retrieve my dog head. Did you deceive them to get them to come?" Unfortunately, it seemed that this question of his wasn't transmitted out. He was also now unable to hear Lingwen's voice by his ear. It was probably because he was so far away from the Immortal City, and it had been so long since he descended, so his magical power was all depleted. Xie Lian was incapable of doing anything else, so he first gave a smile to both the small martial gods before saying, "Was it Nanfeng and Fu Yao? To be willing to come and help me, let me thank you in advance." The two of them only nodded their heads, both appearing to have a somewhat lofty attitude. It seemed that the martial gods they were under had a rather illustrated reputation. Xie Lian got the tea sommelier to add 2 more cups of tea. Picking up his cup, he scraped the tea leaves before casually asking, "Which Highness Palace are you under?" Nanfeng replied, "Nanyang Palace Hall." Fu Yao said, "Xuanzan Palace Hall." This truly made one feel frightened. Xie Lian swallowed his mouthful of tea before asking, "Your palace's general allowed you to come?" The both of them responded, "My palace's general didn't know I came." Xie Lian thought for a bit, before again asking, "Then, do you know who I am?" If these 2 small martial gods came here because they were muddle-headed, and thus deceived by Lingwen, then after helping him, they would return to get scolded by their palace's general. "Something like that certainly wouldn't be worth it." Nan Feng replied, "You are His Royal Highness the Crown Prince." Fu Ya said, "You are the correct path for the human world. You are the heart of the universe." Xie Lian choked once, before he asked Nanfeng in an uncertain manner, "Just now, did he roll his eyes?" Nanfeng responded, "He did, let him scram." Nan Yang's relationship with Xuanzan wasn't good. This wasn't some kind of secret. So when Xie Lian heard of that matter, he didn't really feel surprised. This was because, even back then, Fengxian and Mu Qing's relationship hadn't been all that great. Only, in those days he had been the master and they were the retainers. The Crown Prince said, "Don't argue, you guys have to become good friends." So the 2 of them endured and refrained from becoming hostile with each other. When they became extremely unhappy, at most they would take some words to stab the opposite side. Muddling until today, however, there was no longer a need to be so insincerely courteous. Thus, even the worshippers from the southeast and southwest didn't look upon each other in a positive light, while the Nanyang Palace Hall and the Xuanzan Palace Hall had even more mutual hatred for each other. The 2 in front of him were a typical example. Fu Yao smiled sarcastically as he stated, "Lingwen Zhenjin said that if you were willing, you could come. So, for which reason should I scram and leave?" The word voluntary, saying it with that expression of his, really didn't look convincing. Thus, Xie Lian said, "Let me confirm once. Are you 2 really voluntarily doing this? If you're not, by all means, don't force yourself." The 2 of them both said, "I willingly volunteered." Looking at those 2 deeply depressed faces, Xie Lian mentally thought, the words the 2 of you actually wanted to say were, "I want to commit suicide, right?" In short, Xie Lian began, "Let's first discuss the real work. You guys already know why we came to the north this time, so I won't start explaining from the beginning." The 2 of them both said, "I don't know why." Xie Lian was incapable of doing anything, and could only take out the scroll before saying, "Then it would be best if I explain everything from the start." It was said that many years ago in Mount Jun, there was a bride and a groom who was about to be wed. This couple loved each other very much. The bridegroom waited for the procession that delivered the bride, but even after waiting for a long time, he didn't see the bride arriving. The bridegroom began to feel anxious, and thus began to look for the bride's family. The result was his father-in-law and mother-in-law informing him that his bride had long set off. The 2 households reported this to the officials before they began looking in all directions. From beginning to end, they never found her. But even if she had been eaten by a fierce beast in the mountains, in any case there should have been remains of an arm or a leg or whatnot. What was the justification behind her disappearing in thin air? Thus, it was inevitable that people would harbor suspicions of how it was the bride herself who didn't wish to marry, resulting in her colluding with the procession before escaping. Who would have known that after a few years, another new couple married, and the nightmare repeated itself? The bride disappeared again. However, this time she didn't leave nothing behind. On a small road, people found afoot that something hadn't quite finished eating. Ever since then, things started to get out of hand. In the 100 years after this, a total of 17 brides went missing in the Mount Jun region. Sometimes, there would be a dozen or so years of peace. Other times, 2 brides would go missing in the time span of 1 short month. Before long, a frightening legend began to rapidly spread around. Within Mount Jun lived a ghost bridegroom. If he began to fancy a woman, he would kidnap her during her wedding procession before devouring the party of relatives that were sending her off. Originally, this matter wouldn't be transferred to the heavens. Although there were 17 missing brides, hundreds of thousands of other brides in the world passed their wedding days, safe and sound. In any case, it was impossible to find those brides or protect them now, so people had no other choice but to make do in this kind of situation. The families who dared to marry their daughters off in this region merely lessened a bit, and the local newlyweds didn't dare to make their weddings a big event. However, it was precisely this 17th bride who had a big-shot official for a father. This father rather doted on his daughter, and when he caught wind of this legend, he meticulously selected 40 brave and outstanding military officials to escort his daughter to her bridegroom. However, despite all of his preparations, his daughter still disappeared. This time, the ghost bridegroom really stabbed a hornet's nest. This official could not find anyone in the human realm who could do anything to help. As a result, he furiously made an alliance with his government official friends, and then crazily performed a ritual. This official even followed an expert's advice and opened the granary to help the poor. After making an uproar, he finally managed to startle a heavenly official. Otherwise, it would have been almost impossible for those tiny mortal voices to reach a heavenly official's ear. Xie Lian said, "That's more or less the big picture." Because their expressions looked very uncooperative, he didn't know whether they were listening or not. However, if they hadn't been listening, Xie Lian didn't have any other choices but to explain everything once again. But contrary to what he had expected, Nanfeng raised his head before wrinkling his forehead. He asked, "Do the missing brides have anything in common with each other?" Xie Lian replied, "There were some rich brides and some poor ones. There were beautiful ones and ugly ones. Some were wives and others were concubines. In short, the disappearances completely lack a pattern. One simply cannot determine the preferences of this ghost bridegroom." Nanfeng grunted once before. Raising his teacup and taking a sip, he seemed to have started pondering over their problem. On the other hand, Fu Yao didn't even bother touching the teacup Xie Lian pushed toward him. He just leisurely and continuously wiped his fingers with a white handkerchief. Before he asked indifferently, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince, how did you decide that the ghost is a bridegroom? That can't be certain. No one has ever seen it before. How can you tell if it's a man or a woman, if it's old or young? Are you thinking of things too simply?" Xie Lian smiled before answering. The conclusion written on this scroll was a summary by the heavenly officials from Ling Wen's palace hall. The ghost bridegroom is just the popular name used among the people. However, what you've said really makes sense. After these exchanges, Xie Lian realized that these two martial gods' thought processes were quite clear. Although their expressions didn't look so good, they weren't careless about their work affairs. This made Xie Lian feel considerably gratified. Since the sky outside the window was darkening, the three of them temporarily left the small tea house. Xie Lian put on his bamboo hat before he started to walk. After walking for a bit, he suddenly became aware that the two people behind him hadn't followed. Bewildered, Xie Lian turned around to take a look, before realizing that those two were staring at him in bewilderment as well. Nanfeng asked, "Where are you going?" Xie Lian replied, "I'm going to search for a place to stay." "Fu Yao, why are you rolling your eyes again?" Nanfeng asked again in bewilderment. "Then why are you walking toward the mountains and the wild?" Xie Lian was accustomed to frequently eating and sleeping on the streets. As long as he could find a piece of cloth to spread on the ground, he could lie there for a night. Naturally, he was preparing to find a cave and light a fire, something he usually did. It was only after this reminder that he remembered Nanfeng and Fu Yao were martial gods under their respective palace halls. If there was a Nanyang or Xuanzan temple in the vicinity, they could directly enter it. Why would it be necessary for them to sleep outdoors in the wilderness? In a short while, the three of them found a worn-out and damaged local shrine in an unremarkable and tiny corner. The plate holding the incense was broken, and the whole place gave the impression that it was rarely frequented. The earth god's name was engraved on a small, round stone plaque. Xie Lian called out to him a few times. It had been many years since someone had called or made an offering to this local earth god. When he suddenly heard someone calling him, his eyes widened. He saw the three of them standing in front of him. Even the area around their bodies was covered with a rich layer of divine light. It was simply impossible to see their faces clearly. Jumping up with great alarm, the earth god trembled and shivered. Before asking, "Do the three heavenly officials have any orders for the humble me?" Xie Lian nodded his head in greeting before speaking. "There are no orders. We merely wanted to ask if there are any general Nanyang or general Xuanzan temples in the vicinity." The earth god didn't dare to slight them, and thus replied, This. He calculated on his fingers before saying, "Around 5 li from here, there is a temple to provide offerings to General Nanyang." Xie Lian pressed both of his hands together before replying, "Many thanks." However, that earth god felt as if he was being blinded by those two dazzling lumps of divine light standing beside Xie Lian. Thus, he quickly concealed himself again. Meanwhile, Xie Lian fumbled around before finding some coins to use as an offering to the earth god's shrine. Then, upon spotting the incense sticks scattered to the side, he straightened them before lighting them up. During this process, Fu Yao had rolled his eyes so many times Xie Lian practically wanted to ask him if his eyes were tired. Sure enough, 5 li later, they really spotted a temple. It was erected beside the roadside, and it looked to be popular and prosperous. Although the temple was rather small, everything one would need was there. Still, the place bustled with unusual excitement and noise, as people came and left. The three of them concealed themselves before entering the temple. And sure enough, a godly statue of an armored Nanyang martial god holding a bow was precisely what was located on the altar for offerings. The moment Xie Lian saw this godly statue, he went aha once in his heart. For a small temple in the countryside, the godly statue itself and the paint-on were created quite crudely. As a whole, the look of this statue contrasted hugely to Xie Lian's impression of Feng Xin himself. However, most heavenly officials were accustomed to how their godly statues were inaccurately depicted. Don't mention how their own mothers wouldn't recognize them. There were some heavenly officials who couldn't even recognize their own godly statues. After all, there weren't many master artists who had met the heavenly officials personally. Therefore, these statues were either beautiful to the extreme or ugly as heck. One could only rely on the statue's specific posture, their weapon, and their garments to recognize which heavenly official the statue was depicting. Generally speaking, the richer the area it was built on, the closer the godly statues would look. When compared to the heavenly officials themselves, the poorer the place, the more inferior the artist's taste, which would result in the godly statue becoming a truly tragic sight. Until now, Only General Zhuangzhen's godly statues were rather nice as a whole. Why? It was because most heavenly officials didn't really care if ugly, godly statues of themselves were made. However, whenever Xuanzan saw someone make an ugly, godly statue of himself, he would stealthily break it to make the artist remodel it. Sometimes, he would even create a vague dream to express his dissatisfaction to the artist. Thus, after so long, all the believers now knew that they must create a nice-looking statue of their master. Members of the Xuanzan Palace Hall had a personality similar to their generals. All of them were rather fond of paying attention to detail. Within 1 shikan of entering the Nanyang temple, Fu Yao continuously found fault in the details of the godly statue. It was either the shape was distorted, or the colors of the paint were vulgar, or the technique the artist used was of inferior quality. He even commented on how the artist's tastes were too strange. When Xie Lian saw how the veins on Nanfang's forehead were slowly bulging, he began thinking about how he should quickly find another topic to divert his attention. Coincidentally, Xie Lian saw yet another young lady come inside to pay homage to Nanyang. As she piously kneeled, he began to talk warmly. All things considered, Nanyang Zhenjin's home ground is in the southeast. I didn't expect the incense burning for Nanyang to be this strong in the north as well. When mortals constructed temples, they were actually trying to imitate the palace halls in the heavens. The godly statues, on the other hand, were supposed to be a reflection of the heavenly officials themselves. The gathered believers at a temple, and the incense they burn become a heavenly official's important source of magical power. In addition, as a result of every individual's geographical location, history, social customs, classes, and many other reasons, people living in different areas normally worshipped different heavenly officials. Every heavenly official's magical power was the strongest on their own turf, which was also known as the home field advantage. Only a deity like the martial god Heavenly Emperor could have believers in every nook and cranny under the sky. He was a heavenly official with temples erected in every direction. So whether or not Zhan Wu was on his home ground didn't have any meaning. Nanfeng should be proud that the incense was burning so vigorously at a temple that was not on his general's turf. However, looking at the complexion of his face, it didn't seem like it was a good thing to him. Fu Yao stood to the side and smiled faintly before saying, "Not bad, not bad. General Nanyang receives no small measure of love and respect." Xie Lian responded, "Although, I have a question." "I don't know," Nanfeng cut him off. "If you wish to say I don't know whether it's something suitable to ask, then just don't say it." Xie Lian mentally thought, "No, I wanted to say, I don't know whether anyone could answer it." However, Xie Lian had the premonition that the response to his question would be far from good. Thus he decided that it was still better for him to change their conversation topic once more. Unfortunately, who would have thought that Fu Yao would choose to leisurely speak up now? "I know what you wanted to ask. You must have been wondering, out of so many believers who had came here today, why were such a large amount women, right?" That was precisely the question Xie Lian had wanted to ask. Martial god's female believers were always less than the male believers. Only he had been an exception 800 years ago, and the explanation behind this exception was very simple. It consisted only of a few words. He was good-looking. Xie Lian thoroughly and clearly understood this fact. It hadn't been because he was a person of virtue and prestige, nor was it because he was extraordinarily talented. It had only been because his godly statues looked nice, and his temples also looked nice. Almost all of his temples were built by the imperial household, and his godly statues were made by the top artists across the country. His statues had also been carefully sculpted according to his real face. Moreover, because of his phrase, "Body in the abyss, but heart in paradise," the artists usually liked adding flowers to his godly statues. In addition, they were also fond of turning his temples into a sea of flowering trees. As a result, back then, he had another name. Xie Lian was also known as the flower crown martial god. Thus, the women loved how his godly statues were pretty, and they also liked how his temples were filled with flowers. That was enough to make them dash over. Fortunately, they were also willing to conveniently come in and pay their respects. To him, however, normal martial gods were usually surrounded by heavy killing intent. Thus, more often than not, the appearances of their godly statues were solemn, fierce, or callous. For female believers, they would rather go worship the goddess of mercy, Guanyan, rather than stare at statues like that. And although this godly statue of Nanyang was far from releasing killing intent just because of its appearance, it was still far from something that could be considered to be good. However, there were practically more female believers who came to pay homage to Nanyang than the number of male believers. In addition, it was clear that Nanfeng unexpectedly didn't want to answer this question. Thus, Xie Lian found things to be quite weird. At that moment, that young girl finished paying homage and got up to light some incense. She also turned around. When Xie Lian saw her turn around, he slightly pushed the other two people. Originally, neither of them were resistant to looking. Being pushed like that, they casually followed his gaze. However, this one look made both of their expressions suddenly change. Fu Yao yelled, "Too ugly." Xie Lian choked for a moment before he managed to speak. "Fu Yao, you can't say something like that about a girl." In all fairness, what Fu Yao said was the truth. That young lady's face was incomparably flat, as if someone had flattened it by giving her a hard slap. In addition, if one said her facial features were mediocre, then it would really cause the word mediocre to feel wronged. If someone had to give her appearance a description, then Xie Lian was afraid they could only use the phrase a crooked nose and slanted eyes. However, Xie Lian absolutely didn't distinguish whether she was beautiful or ugly. The main reason for that was, when she had turned around, a gigantic hole could be seen at the back of her skirt. It was truly impossible for one to pretend they had not seen it. Fu Yao was shocked at first, but he quickly calmed down. On the other hand, the pulsing veins on Nanfang's forehead disappeared without a trace. When he saw how their complexion changed, Xie Lian hurriedly said, "Don't fret, don't fret." After that young girl retrieved her incense, she kneeled down once more. Then she began to pay her respects as she started to talk. "Protect us, General Nanyang." Female believer Little Ying prays that the ghost bridegroom will be captured as soon as possible. Don't let innocent people suffer his evil. She did her worshipping in a truly devout manner, totally unaware of the hole on her skirt. She was also completely unaware of the three people crouching by the foot of the godly statue. She was currently paying her respects too. Xie Lian felt a headache as he asked, "What should we do? We can't let her leave like this, can we? She'll be seen by everyone on her way home." Moreover, the tear on her skirt looked as if it was deliberately created by someone with a sharp object. Xie Lian was afraid that not only would there be people who would come and watch, there would also be people who would wantonly ridicule her, creating a public spectacle. Something like that would truly be humiliating. Fu Yao replied indifferently, "Don't ask me. The one she's worshipping isn't my General Zhuanzan. There wasn't harassment. I didn't see anything." On the other hand, Nanyang's handsome face just alternated between green and white. He could only wave his hand around, but he couldn't say anything. A proper and proud lord was forced into becoming a mute. It was clear you could no longer count on him. Thus, Xie Lian had no alternatives other than doing something himself. After thinking for a bit, he took off his outer robe and dropped it. Following a breeze, that robe floated toward the young girl's body before blocking that indecent hole on her skirt. With that done, the three of them released a sigh of relief. However, that gust of wind was really too exaggerated. It scared that young girl and made her look around in all directions. She then took off that robe, hesitating for a moment before she placed in on the stage of the statue. She was actually still completely unaware of her own situation. In addition, as her incense had finished burning, she began preparing to leave. However, if they really allowed her to walk out and about, Xie Lian was afraid that this young lady would no longer dare to meet people because of her shame. When Xie Lian saw how the two people beside him were just stiff and stiffer, both looking completely useless, he sighed a bit. Nanfeng and Fuyao only felt the space by their sides empty before they realized that Xie Lian had already taken a form mortals could see and jumped down. The lights in the temple weren't dark, but they did make things look unclear. This one jump of Xie Lian's brought about another gust of wind, making the flames of those candles flicker. That young girl, little Ying, only felt as if her sight shimmered before she saw a man abruptly emerge from that darkness. The upper part of his body was bare. Thus when he extended a hand toward her, little Ying's soul basically flew away and scattered in fright. As expected, that girl shrieked. Xie Lian was just about to speak when that girl reflexively threw out a slap as she yelled, "Ah, harassment, pa." Xie Lian earned a slap on his face. The sound of the slap was sharp and clear. When they heard it, the faces of the two people who were still crouching by the godly statue both began to rapidly twitch in the same way. Although he suffered a slap like that, Xie Lian was neither annoyed nor angry. He only resolutely passed over his outer robe before rapidly saying a few words in a quiet tone. Upon hearing him, that girl became shocked. The moment she touched the back of her skirt, her face immediately became red as her eyes filled with tears in less than a split second. One was unable to tell if she was angered to tears or shamed to tears, but she firmly grasped the robe Xie Lian gave her before she rushed out of the temple and left. Only Xie Lian's fragile-looking figure was left in that empty temple. When a cool breeze passed through, he suddenly felt a bit cold. Xie Lian rubbed his face before he turned around. Sporting a red handprint on a cheek, he began speaking to the other two little gods. "All right. Everything's fine now." The moment his voice faded, Nanfeng pointed at him before asking, Did your wound open?" Xie Lian looked down before uttering. And what was revealed after he took off his outer robe was pretty skin, as white as jade. However, his chest was covered completely with layer after layer of white cloth, bound extremely tightly. Even his neck and both of his wrists were wrapped with bandages, with countless tiny wounds crawling from underneath the edges of the white cloth. It was truly a shocking sight. After thinking about it, Xie Lian determined that his sprained neck should be fine by now. Thus, he began unbinding his bandages. Fuyao gave him 2 looks before asking, "Who was it?" Xie Lian replied. "What?" Fuyao elaborated. "Who was the one who fought against you?" Xie Lian fought. "Ah, no one, Nanfeng." "Then these wounds on your body," Xie Lian hurriedly explained. "I fell by myself." They were the wounds he had accumulated as he rolled down from the heavens. If he really had fought against someone, then it would be hard to say if he could even be wounded to this degree. To this degree, Fuyao muttered something under his breath. Xie Lian couldn't make out what he had said. But since it was certainly not praise for him trying to be strong, Xie Lian disregarded it. He just finished unwrapping the cloth around his neck. However, once he did that, Nanfeng and Fuyao's gazes became so concentrated they practically solidified on his neck. A black collar encircled his snow-white neck. Sensing their gaze, Xie Lian smiled faintly before turning around. He asked, "Is it your first time seeing a genuine cursed collar?" The cursed collar, as its name implied, was a curse that took the shape of a shackle. The heavenly officials that were demoted and banished from heaven would receive an imprint of their sins on their body, something that could be considered as the accumulation of heaven's wrath. This imprint took the form of a shackle, one that blocked the heavenly official's spiritual power. It was something one could never break themselves from or lose. It was the same as stamping a tattoo on their face or binding their hands and feet with chains. It was a type of punishment and also a type of warning, one that made the person in question feel both fear and shame, as the laughingstick of the three realms and one who had been banished from the heavens 3 times. Xie Lian naturally had this kind of cursed collar imprinted on his body. It was impossible for these 2 small martial gods to not have heard of this fact. However, there was still a difference between hearing someone say it in passing and seeing it personally with their own eyes. Thus, Xie Lian could understand why the 2 martial gods would have that kind of expression on their faces. He guessed that this cursed collar of his probably made them feel a bit afraid and uneasy. After all, this wasn't the sign of a good thing. Using the excuse that he needed a new top, Xie Lian originally wanted to slip outside and walk around. However, that didn't happen because Fu Yao rolled his eyes and said, "It would be utterly obscene of you should you go outside to stroll on the main street with your current appearance." In the end, it was Nan Feng who casually grabbed some clothes from the temple for Xie Lian, stopping him from proceeding with his obscene plan. But after Xie Lian tidied up and sat down again, he felt that after the previous events, the atmosphere had become somewhat awkward. Therefore, Xie Lian took out the scrolling when Palace Hall had prepared for him before asking, "Do you guys want to take another look at this?" Nanfeng lifted his head to give him a look before replying, "I've already seen it. I think he is the one who needs a better look." Fu Yao retorted, "What do you mean I should be the one to take a better look? That scroll didn't even have any details. Utterly worthless. Does it even deserve someone to keep reading it over?" When he heard how Fu Yao said the scroll was utterly worthless, Xie Lian couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for the literary gods of Lingwen Palace Hall. Those gods wrote so many scrolls. Their faces even turned ashen in color. Then Xie Lian heard Fu Yao continue to say, "Ah, where did we leave off at? Oh yes, the reason behind why Nanyang has so many female worshippers, right? Okay then." Xie Lian put away the scroll before rubbing that pulsing spot in between his eyes. In his mind, he knew that they wouldn't be able to read anything tonight. If no proper work could be done, then at least this situation could get cleared up. It turned out that apart from His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, who spent hundreds of years collecting rubbish in the human realm, nowadays all the other gods were aware of the reason. Nanyang Zhenjin Fengshin had once been called the Ruyang Tremendous Masculinity. Zhenjin for some years. The person himself had abhorred this name. Toward what Fengshin had experienced, other people could only sum up their feelings with the words, "What injustice!" This was because the original and correct way to spell his name was Ru Yang altogether, bright but with a different Chinese character for Ru. The reason his name had been misinterpreted had been because of a small mishap. Many years ago, a monarch wanted to renovate his temples. To show his sincerity, he personally wrote the words on a plaque for every temple hall. However, when he wrote the inscription on the plaque for Ruyang Palace Hall, he somehow misspelled the first word. This time, the official responsible for the temple renovation matters almost worried himself to death. He couldn't make sense of it. In the end, was His Majesty deliberately changing the name? Or had he not been careful and made a mistake? If it was deliberate, why hadn't he made a decree and state he wanted to change it to this? But if it wasn't on purpose, how could he make this kind of low-level mistake? It wasn't like he could go and say, "Your Majesty, you're wrong." Who knew if His Majesty would think he was mocking his carelessness? Maybe His Majesty would even think that he was suggesting his knowledge was superficial and his heart wasn't sincere. In addition, this was made with His Majesty's ink treasure. Was it going to become void? The hardest thing to guess in this world was an emperor's intentions. That official was extremely conflicted. However, after thinking things over, he decided that it was better to cause Ruyang Zhenjin some grief, rather than making His Majesty feel wronged. One had to admit that the official made the right decision. when His Majesty discovered that Ruyang, altogether bright, had changed into Ruyang, tremendous masculinity, he didn't say anything. Instead, he invited a whole flock of scholars, before vigorously thumbing through ancient books. After finding countless minor details to justify the reason for the change, they wrote many articles, doing their utmost best to prove that the original spelling was Ruyang, tremendous masculinity, and that Ruyang, altogether bright, had been the wrong way to write it. In short, one night after this event, the whole nation's Ruyang, altogether bright temples turned into Ruyang, tremendous masculinity temples. The Fengshen, who had suddenly gotten a godly title change, didn't find out about this matter until 10 years passed. He had never carefully looked at the signs of his own temples before. One day, he just suddenly felt very gloomy. Why were there so many women who came to worship him in his temples? In addition, why was every one of them so shy as they prayed, with thoroughly red faces? What kind of things were they beseeching for when they lit the incense? After he found out what happened, Fengshen rushed into the summit of the firmament, faced the scorching sun and vast sky, before swearing a round of curses. Unsurprisingly, he shocked all the heavenly officials there. After he finished cursing, there wasn't anything he could do. If they wanted to worship him, then he could only let them worship. It wasn't like he could make life difficult for these pious and praying women. Thus, he braced himself before listening to their prayers for numerous years. This continued until an honorable monarch felt that this title, Ruyang, tremendous masculinity, was simply scandalous, and thus he changed it to Nanyang. However, people had not forgotten that other than being a martial god, Nanyang was also a god who could offer blessings and protection. Just, everyone tacitly understood to never use those two words to address Nanyang. At the same time, the other gods mutually knew how to assess Nanyang. You only needed a few words. He was good. As long as you didn't make him curse people out, everything was well. On that side, Nanfeng's face had blackened so much it could be compared to an old pot. But over here, Fu Yao was very excited as he spoke in a cultured manner, a lady's friend, the most effective when praying for a son. The secret booster for the virality of men, Nanyang, deliverer of children. Ha ha ha. Xie Lian benevolently resisted the urge to smile, an attempt to leave some honor to the godly statue of Nanyang in front of them. Suddenly, Nanfeng spoke up in an angry tone, "Stop being so weird here. If you feel too idle, don't panic, you can go sweep the floor." The moment he said those words, Fu Yao's face also turned as black as a pot. If one said that the thing Yang Palace Hall couldn't tolerate hearing was their previous title, then the thing Zhuanzan Palace Hall couldn't bear hearing was sweeping the floor, that kind of thing. This was because, when Mu Qing had been doing the odd jobs at Huangji Temple, what he did all day was deliver tea to His Highness the Crown Prince, Xie Lian, give him water, sweep the floor, or make his bed. One day, Xie Lian saw how he would recite cultivation chants while sweeping the floor, and became vigorously moved at how Mu Qing would take such pains and fight against adversity to study. This was what made him ask the Taoist ministers for a favor, to receive Mu Qing as their disciple. This matter, how does one phrase it? It was something that could be considered as important, or it could be considered as something insignificant. It could be shameful to the person in question, or it might not matter to him. However, for what that person thought, they evidently believed that this matter was the most humiliating thing they experienced in their whole life. This was because both Mu Qing and all the martial gods in his palace hall would have a falling out with someone should they bring up that time. Sure enough, Fu Yao paused a bit before he stared at the very innocent Xie Lian, who was waving his hands and standing to the side. Fu Yao smiled sarcastically before saying something like that. People who didn't know would have thought that you gods at the Nanyang Palace Hall would have aided His Highness the Crown Prince. Nanfeng also smiled sarcastically. Your general is indeed someone who would kick their benefactor in their teeth. What more can you say? Ah, Xie Lian had just wanted to interfere in their argument, when Fu Yao started speaking with a chuckle. Ah ha ha, your general is only a pot that calls the kettle black. What qualifications do you have to say these words? Xie Lian couldn't take it anymore, as he watched the two of them use him as a big stick that hammered both of their generals' backs. He cut in. Wait, stop it. Naturally, no one paid attention to him. In addition, they actually started fighting. Xie Lian didn't know who attacked the other first, but in any case, the table for the sacrificial offerings cracked into two halves. The bowl with the fruits fell, and those fruits rolled everywhere on the floor. Seeing this, Xie Lian figured that it was probably impossible to hold them back from fighting. Thus, he sat down in a corner before sighing. Ah, how unlucky. He picked up the small steamed bun that had rolled to his side. Then, he rubbed and removed the skin before preparing to eat it. However, when Nanfeng glimpsed this out of the corner of his eye, he immediately swept out his palm to hit that bun away. Don't eat it. Fu Yao also stopped, before he spoke in a shocked and a disdaining manner. It even fell into the ashes. You can still stomach that. Xie Lian took the chance to wave his hands again. He said, Stop. I have something to say. After separating the two martial gods, Xie Lian began in an amicable manner. First, that crown prince you're referring to is precisely me. This prince hadn't even said anything, so don't use me as your weapon to attack each other. He paused for a moment before adding another sentence. I believe that both of your generals would never do something like this. For you to lack propriety like this, how would their prestige survive? The moment he said those words, the expressions of the two martial gods turned a bit strange. Xie Lian continued and said, Second, you're here to help me, right? Then are you guys supposed to listen to me, or am I supposed to listen to you? After quite a while, the two of them finally said, We're supposed to listen to you. Although they said that, their faces looked as if they were saying, Dream on, for us to listen to you. However, Xie Lian was already very satisfied with that response. Thus, he clapped his hands and said, All right. Lastly, the third and most important point: if it is necessary to abandon something, then please, just throw me away. Don't ever throw away food. Meanwhile, Nanfeng finally dug out the steamed bun Xie Lian had picked up again and held in his grasp, the one Xie Lian planned to eat later when he found an opportunity. At the end of his patience, Nanfeng yelled, If it fell on the ground, don't eat it anymore. The next day at the chance encounter, little the tea sommelier was once again sitting at the door, crossing his legs as he relaxed. From far away, he saw three figures slowly approaching. The Taoist, who wore simple, white garments and carried a bamboo hat, walked in front, while two tall teenagers who wore black clothes followed behind him. That Taoist arrived idly with his arms crossed before he idly spoke, looking even more like an idle person than the tea sommelier himself. The Taoist said, Mister, sorry for the inconvenience, but may I get 3 cups of tea? The tea sommelier replied with a smile, coming. However, in his heart, the tea sommelier thought, These 3 foolish big brothers are here again. What a pity! Each one of them looked more respectable than the other. However, each of their brains are sicker as well. Always talking about this god or that immortal, this ghost or that heaven. These people are all mentally ill. No matter how dignified they looked, what was the use when they were like this? Once again, Xie Lian picked a table beside the window. After they all sat down, Nanfeng spoke up. Why do you want to come here to speak about this? Can you ensure others won't hear us? Xie Lian replied in a warm tone, It doesn't matter. Even if others hear us, they wouldn't do anything. They would only think we're mentally ill. Xie Lian continued to speak. In order to prevent the 3 of us from squandering Our time like before, let's get straight to the point. After having calmed down, did you guys think of any plans? Fu Yao's eyes lit up as he responded in a cold tone, let's kill it. Nanfeng snorted. No shift. Xie Lian said, Nanfeng, you don't have to be this fierce. Fu Yao didn't say anything. Wrong. The fundamental way to solve this problem is precisely to kill it. The problem is, where do we kill it? Who should we kill? How do we kill it? I suggest, at this moment, the sound of drums and fanfare once again drifted over from the street. Thus, the three of them looked out of the window. Once again, it was that group of relatives who delivered the bride. The procession of both people and horses drummed their instruments as they yelled. Even their shouting had hints of a roar and it, as if they were afraid others could not hear them. Seeing this scene, Nanfeng frowned before asking, wasn't it said that the native people living in and around the Mount Jun region never dared to make a ruckus or throw a big celebration when they married? In the ranks of this procession, the people were all strong and sturdy tanned men. Their expressions and their muscles were all stretched tautly as their foreheads were covered in cold sweat. It was as if the thing they were carrying wasn't a big marriage sedan filled with joy, but was instead a guillotine that would seize their souls and cut off their heads, forcing them to death. Xie Lian wondered what kind of person was sitting in that marriage sedan, pondering for a bit. Xie Lian was about to go out to take a look, when a puff of cold wind blasted over. The curtain on one side of the sedan followed the airflow and fluttered upward. The person behind the curtain was using a very strange posture to lie crookedly in the sedan. Her head was also crooked, and what was revealed under her veil was a mouth painted with scarlet red. However, the corners of her smile were overly exaggerated. The sedan jolted and that veil slid down, exposing a pair of round eyes. Eyes that were staring firmly in their direction. This clearly looked like a woman who had broken her neck and was currently laughing soundlessly at them. Xie Lian didn't know if it was because the hands of the people carrying the sedan were shaking too much, for that sedan wasn't very stable. That woman's head also followed the sedan's movements and swayed. It swayed and swayed until thud. A head fell down and rolled onto the street, and that headless body also fell forward. With a loud bang, the whole person fell out the sedan door.